Today, I'm going to react to a Bill Nye video in which he answers somebody else asking him about what he thinks about philosophy. And then I'm going to give my own answer to that question. Let's check it out.
Hey Bill, Mike here. I'm a philosophy major in college right now, and I'm looking for your opinion on the subject. Some of the scientists like Stephen Hawking and Neil deGrasse Tyson have brushed it off as a meaningless topic. I'm just wondering about your thoughts on the subject.
Mike, this is a great question. I'm not sure that Neil deGrasse Tyson and Richard Dawkins declared philosophy as irrelevant and blown it off in your term. I think that they're just concerned that it doesn't always give an answer that's surprising. It doesn't always lead you someplace that is inconsistent with common sense. And it often gets back to this question: what is the nature of consciousness? Can we know that we know?
Okay, I agree. Philosophy doesn't always give us conclusions that are counterintuitive, but is that necessarily a bad thing? Like, does that make it less valuable? Like, that's not clear to me, right? So, for instance, let's say that there is this common moral belief that, X is wrong, okay, or X is right. And philosophers come up with the best arguments to support those positions. I would say that that's valuable. Also, I'm not sure if the same thing couldn't also be said of science, right? Doesn't science not always give us a conclusion or a discovery that's counterintuitive or that's inconsistent with common sense? I'm not sure about that.
Are we aware that we are aware? Are we not aware that we are aware? Is reality real or is reality not real? And we are all living on a ping pong ball that's part of a giant interplanetary ping pong game that we cannot sense it. These are interesting questions.
I'm not entirely sure what he's getting at here. Maybe he's referring to the fact that philosophers often use thought experiments. Maybe.
The idea that reality is not real or what you sense and feel is not authentic is something I'm very skeptical of. I mean, I think that your senses and the reality that you interact with light, heat, sense of touch, taste, smell, hearing, absolutely hearing, these are real things. And to make a philosophical argument that they may not be real because you can't prove, like, for example,
Okay, so I think what he's talking about is some sort of skepticism, right? Like we rely on our senses to get information about the external world, but how do we know our senses are reliable? So I think that's what he's talking about.
philosophy is important for a while, but it's also, I get where Neil and Richard might be coming from. I call him Richard, might be coming from, where you start arguing in a circle where I think, therefore I am. Well, what if you don't think about it? Do you not exist anymore? You probably still exist, even if you're not thinking about existence. And so, this gets into the old thing. If you drop a hammer on your foot, is it real or is it just your imagination? You can run that test, a couple times, and I hope you come to agree that it's probably real. It's a cool question. It's important, I think, for a lot of people to be aware of philosophy, but just keep in mind, if you're spending all this money on college, and this also may be where Neil and Richard are coming from, philosophy degree may not lead you on a career path. It might, but it may not. And
Well, I recently covered an article that showed that philosophy majors actually make decent money.
just keep in mind, humans made up philosophy too. Humans discovered or invented the process of science. Humans invented language. Humans invented philosophy. So keep that in mind, that when you go to seek an absolute truth, you're a human seeking the truth. So there's going to be limits. But there's also going to be things beyond which it doesn't matter. Drop the hammer on your foot and see if you don't notice it.
Drop the hammer on your foot and see if you don't notice it. I'm not entirely sure what he's trying to get at with that statement. Do philosophers think that if you drop a hammer on your foot that you're not going to notice it? Like, I'm not sure who says that. All right, so here are some final thoughts. The first is that I like Bill Nye, right? Like, I want to be his friend. I used to watch his show when I was a kid, so I have fond memories of him. But I don't know how much exposure to philosophy that he has had. His comment suggests to me that his exposure to philosophy is metaphysics and epistemology, right? And maybe that's what they covered in his philosophy 101 class. I'm not entirely sure. But there are other branches of philosophy, right? So there's ethics, there's political philosophy. I would say that those subfields are valuable because they address important and unavoidable questions. The other thought is that I'm not entirely sure what Bill Nye was trying to say. There were some statements that he made where it really just got me confused. Like, is he trying to say that philosophy is not relevant here, or is he trying to say that it's pointless? I wasn't entirely sure. Okay, I would like to have a conversation with him about it, just to pick his brain. And regarding the original question, which was, does science have all the answers, or do we need to look at philosophy too? I would say science cannot give us all the answers, right? Like, science cannot give us answers to moral questions, to questions regarding value, right? Science cannot tell us what we ought to do, what we ought to value, what we ought to find important, right? Science can tell us what the the best things in life are. It can't tell us what's non-instrumentally good for us. Those are all questions for philosophers to answer. So, for example, let's take the question of eating meat, right? Or being vegetarian, which is more ethical. Science cannot really tell you the answer to that without already making philosophical assumptions. Okay? Philosophy is unavoidable. You are either doing philosophy or you are making philosophical assumptions. Think about it. How would you determine if eating meat was right or wrong without referencing some sort of moral theory or moral assumption that you're making, right? And the minute that you do that, you're doing philosophy, right? So, for instance, let's say you think eating meat is wrong because it causes more suffering. Okay, which is an empirical claim that you can make, right? That's something that science could actually help us figure out, right? But that assumes that suffering is bad. Why do you think suffering is bad, right? Why do you think the suffering of animals is that bad, right? Why do you think it's bad enough for us to change our behavior, right? Like, how come our pleasure and the satisfaction of our preferences don't outweigh the suffering that animals experience when we eat them, right? And let's take a completely different situation. Let's think about vaccine allocation, right? And what protocol that we should follow when there is a scarcity of something like vaccines. Well, one of the ethical principles that are adopted when it comes to something like vaccine allocation is the maximization of benefits, okay? Which is, if you know some philosophy, is utilitarianism, right? That is utilitarianism in practice, okay? Science cannot tell us whether or not we ought to employ utilitarianism in these situations, okay? And if they wanted to argue for or against it, they would be doing philosophy. Okay, I think I'm going to end it here. I hope you guys learned something interesting, and I'll see you all next time.